The crowd roared like thunder, shaking the massive stone walls of the Eridani arena. Thousands of alien warriors, their armored bodies glowing under the artificial suns above, pounded their fists together in excitement. Today, their greatest champion, Commander Xyra, would fight again. And this time, she would face a human. To the Eridani, humans were weak. Small creatures from a distant planet. The Dominion had conquered many worlds, and Earth was supposed to be just another victory. But something unexpected had happened. Humans fought back. They refused to surrender, using clever tactics and surprising strategies. The Dominion lost more ships than expected. It was embarrassing. So, to end this resistance once and for all, the Eridani gave humanity a choice. Send your strongest warrior. If they win, Earth remains free. If they lose, humanity belongs to the Dominion. And now, the challenger had arrived. A single gate rumbled open, and Captain Elias Voss stepped onto the battlefield. The crowd fell silent. He looked ordinary. He wore no heavy armor like the Eridani, no shining weapons or advanced technology, just a simple combat uniform and a sharp gaze. He was tall for a human, but compared to the towering Eridani warriors, he looked fragile, insignificant. Xyra, already standing in the center of the arena, narrowed her golden eyes. She was the finest warrior of her people, undefeated in over 100 battles. The scars on her blue-gray skin told the story of every victory. Her battle axe, nearly as tall as Elias himself, rested on her shoulder. She took a step forward. "This is your champion," she said, her voice filled with disappointment. "Is this some kind of joke?" Elias didn't answer. He simply rolled his shoulders, loosened his arms, and stared back. Xyra grinned. "I will make this quick." The arena master raised his clawed hand. "Begin." Xyra lunged, moving like a storm, her battle axe cutting through the air with deadly speed. The fight should have ended right there. No creature, no species, could match Eridani's strength. But Elias was gone. Xyra's axe slammed into the ground, shattering stone. But she had missed. Elias had already moved, sidestepping at the last second, just out of reach. His movements were smooth, effortless, as if he had known exactly where she would strike. Xyra growled. "Lucky." She swung again, faster this time. A sweeping arc meant to cleave him in half. But again, Elias wasn't there. He ducked, twisting his body, slipping just under the strike. He was too fast. The crowd murmured. This was strange. Humans weren't supposed to fight like this. Elias struck back, not with brute force, but with precision. His fist shot forward. A single, controlled punch took Xyra's ribs. The impact was small, too small to cause damage. But Xyra felt something odd. A slight shift in her balance, a pressure on a weak spot she had never considered before. She ignored it. She attacked again, faster, stronger. This time, she was sure she would crush him. But again, Elias slipped past her. Another strike. This time, he hit the inside of her elbow, a place no warrior would normally attack. It was not a powerful blow, but Xyra felt her grip loosen for just a second. It was enough to make her uncomfortable. She snarled, "Fight properly." Elias finally spoke. "I am." He wasn't playing by her rules. He didn't rely on brute strength like the Eridani. He moved differently, fought differently. He was watching, analyzing, adapting. The duel continued. The more Xyra attacked, the more Elias dodged, countered, redirected. Each time, his movements became sharper. Each time, his strikes became more precise. He was studying her, learning. For the first time in her long career, Xyra missed 3 times in a row. The crowd saw it too. The cheers quieted, replaced by uneasy whispers. Xyra's breathing became heavy. This human was different. For the first time, doubt crept into her mind. Xyra took a deep breath, tightening her grip on her battle axe. This was wrong. The fight should have ended by now. No one had ever lasted this long against her. Not warriors twice her size, not the finest duelists of the Eridani Dominion. And yet, here stood a human, unharmed, still moving like a shadow, still studying her like a puzzle waiting to be solved. She refused to accept it. With a roar, Scifi charged again, swinging her axe in a deadly arc. This time, she poured all her strength into it. If Elias dodged, the sheer force of the attack would break the ground beneath him, leaving him no room to escape. But Elias didn't dodge. He stepped in. At the last possible moment, he moved closer, so close that Scifi's axe whistled past his back, missing by inches. In that split second, before she could recover, Elias struck, a sharp jab, right at the joint of her shoulder. Zara grunted in pain. It wasn't a deep injury, but it was placed perfectly. Her arm numbed for half a second, long enough for Elias to slide away, untouched once again. The crowd gasped. What was happening? Scifi's expression darkened. This was not strength. This was trickery. You fight like a coward, she spat. Elias tilted his head. I fight to win. His voice was calm, steady, without arrogance. That made Scifi even angrier. She was stronger. She was faster. So why? Sarah shook off the numbness in her arm. Enough. If brute force didn't work, she would outlast him. Humans were weaker. They had smaller bodies, lower endurance. All she had to do was keep attacking, keep pressuring him, until his fragile human body collapsed from exhaustion. She went on the offensive, striking again and again. Her movements became a blur, a whirlwind of attacks, relentless and overwhelming. The ground cracked beneath their feet. The air hummed with the speed of her strikes. And yet, Elias still wasn't there. He moved, he weaved. He flowed like water. Every swing missed by an inch. Every strike glided past his body. Every attack met only empty air. The longer the fight continued, the more Scifi realized something horrifying. He wasn't struggling. He was in control. The crowd had fallen silent. The energy in the arena shifted. The Eridani warriors, once cheering for their champion, now watched in uneasy disbelief. Because Elias was getting faster. Scifi was slowing down. Her muscles ached. Her movements became heavier. Her breath came in short bursts. And he was still untouched. This is impossible, she thought. Humans aren't supposed to be like this. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to ignore the pain. She would not lose. She would not yield. But then, Elias finally attacked. A quick step forward, a sharp elbow strike to the ribs, another hit to the back of her knee. Each movement was precise, not meant to kill, but to unbalance. Scifi stumbled. The moment her knee touched the ground, the arena erupted in gasps. She had fallen. Elias stood over her, breathing hard but still steady. His face was unreadable. He could finish her right now, but he didn't move. Scifi's hands trembled as she pushed herself up. This couldn't be real. I understand now, Elias said quietly. Scifi looked at him, her chest rising and falling. Understand what? She growled. He nodded toward the Eridani warriors in the stands. Your people believe strength is everything. But strength isn't just about power. She clenched her fists. Then what is it? Elias wiped sweat from his brow. Adaptation. Scifi's breath caught in her throat. Humans, weak, fragile, inferior, were not fighting for dominance. They were fighting to survive. And they were learning, changing, evolving in real time. Zara had spent her life mastering combat. She had fought hundreds of enemies, studied every weapon, perfected every technique. And yet in this one battle, Elias had learned more about her fighting style than she had about his. He wasn't fighting to prove he was the strongest. He was fighting to win. For the first time in her life, Syra felt doubt, and that terrified her. Syra's breaths came hard and fast. Sweat dripped from her forehead, mixing with the dust of the arena floor. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had trained her whole life, fought countless warriors, and never once had she been pushed this far. Yet here she was, struggling against a human, a species she had believed to be weak. Across from her, Elias Voss stood calmly, his eyes sharp and focused. His uniform was slightly torn, but he looked unshaken. He wasn't exhausted, not like her. He was waiting. Syra slowly rose to her feet, her muscles aching. She clenched her fists, feeling her strength returning. She would not lose. The crowd remained silent. The Eridani warriors who had once cheered for her now watched in disbelief. Their greatest champion was struggling against a being they had underestimated. Syra took a deep breath. This fight wasn't over. She charged again, this time with more control, more focus. She wouldn't just rely on strength, she would be smart. Elias moved to dodge, but she was ready. At the last second, she shifted her attack, changing direction mid-strike. She adapted. The edge of her axe clipped his side, cutting through his uniform. Blood seeped through the fabric. It was a small wound, but it was the first real hit she had landed. The crowd roared. Syra grinned. "You're not untouchable, human." Elias exhaled sharply and glanced at his wound. Then he smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Neither are you." Before Syra could react, Elias moved. Fast, too fast. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it just enough to loosen her grip on the axe. Then, in a swift motion, he kicked her leg out from under her. She crashed to one knee again. Before she could rise, Elias pressed his palm against her chest and shoved her backward. Syra tumbled across the arena floor, dust rising around her. She coughed, her eyes wide. No one had ever done that to her before. She looked up and saw Elias standing there, still watching, still studying. He had adapted. Again. The crowd's realization. The Eridani spectators exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen a battle like this. Eridani duels were always about brute force. Whoever was stronger won. But this human? He wasn't stronger. And yet, he was winning. The Dominion leaders sat high in their royal seats, their expressions dark. This fight was supposed to show the galaxy that humans were inferior. Instead, it was proving the opposite. Syra slowly pushed herself to her feet. She was breathing hard now, her body aching from the repeated falls. Elias waited. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't arrogant. He was just ready. For the first time, Syra felt something she had never felt in combat. Uncertainty. The warrior's doubt. She gritted her teeth. How? Elias wiped some sweat from his brow. Because humans learn. She clenched her fists. So do the Eridani. Elias nodded. Then why are you still fighting the same way? Syra stiffened. He was right. She had never changed. She had never needed to. Her strength had always been enough. But not this time. For the first time, she questioned everything. Was strength really the greatest power? She had always believed that warriors were born strong, that the weak would always fall. But Elias had proved that strength was not fixed. It could be earned, built, adapted. And that meant humans were dangerous. A silent decision. Syra took a deep breath. She lifted her axe again. But this time, something was different. She wasn't fighting out of pride anymore. She wasn't fighting for dominance. Now she was fighting to understand. Elias saw the shift in her stance and gave a small nod. He had won something more important than the fight. He had forced an Eridani warrior to question her beliefs. And in war, that was the most powerful victory of all. Thousands of Eridani warriors, once cheering for their champion, now watched in disbelief. Their greatest fighter, Commander Syra, stood in the dust, bruised and struggling for breath. Across from her, Elias Voss remained standing, blood on his uniform, but his eyes steady, unshaken. For the first time in her life, Syra was unsure of herself. She tightened her grip on her battle axe. The weight of it felt heavier now, not because she was tired, but because doubt had crept into her mind. Elias wasn't stronger than her. He wasn't faster. But somehow he had turned the fight in his favor. She took a slow breath. This isn't over. The crowd might have lost their voices, but she hadn't lost yet. The final strategy. Kyra lifted her axe, adjusting her stance. She needed to change. She had always fought using brute force, but Elias had shown her that raw power alone wasn't enough. She exhaled. Fine. If he could adapt, so could she. This time, she wouldn't charge blindly. She wouldn't waste energy on wild attacks. Instead, she would wait. Elias noticed the change immediately. His sharp gaze flickered with interest. She's learning. For the first time in the battle, he hesitated. And that was what Syra needed. She moved, but not to attack. She circled him, studying his movements, waiting for an opening. The roles had reversed. Now, she was watching him. Elias shifted slightly, preparing to move. Iris saw it, a small twitch in his shoulder, a tell before his next step. She struck fast and precise, forcing him to dodge. But this time, she was ready. As soon as he moved, she adjusted mid-swing, aiming for where he was going, not where he was. The edge of her axe grazed his leg. A clean hit. The crowd gasped. Zyra grinned. You're not the only one who learns, human. Elias let out a slow breath, nodding slightly. Good. But there was something in his voice that made Syra uneasy. Like he was expecting this. The unpredictable human mind. Syra had adapted to Elias. But what she hadn't realized was, Elias had already adapted to her adaptation. Before she could press her advantage, he changed his entire strategy. Instead of dodging, he stepped forward, entering her attack range on purpose, too close for her to swing properly. Zyra's eyes widened. A mistake. No, a trap. Elias struck with lightning speed, not with power, but with precision. A sharp jab to the wrist, another to the shoulder joint, then a final push, using her own momentum against her. Zyra lost balance. She stumbled back, barely stopping herself from falling. Impossible. She had just learned how to counter him, but he had already found a new way to counter her. She gritted her teeth. How does he do this? Then it hit her. Eridani warriors trained for years to master their fighting styles. Humans, however, could adapt in minutes. They didn't just react. They changed the game. Zyra clenched her fists. This is why the Dominion fears them. If every human was like Elias, if they could change, evolve, and overcome obstacles this fast, then they weren't weak. They were dangerous, and they could not be conquered. The silent message. Elias could see the realization in Syra's eyes. She understood now, and so did the thousands of Eridani warriors watching. For the first time, they questioned their own beliefs. The Dominion had taught them that humans were inferior, that their kind would fall like all others before them. But today, in this arena, before their very eyes, a human was proving them wrong. Zyra took a slow, deep breath, her hands clenched, then relaxed. She looked at Elias, her expression unreadable. Then she did something no one expected. She planted her axe into the ground. She stopped fighting. Gasps filled the arena. The Eridani never surrendered. It was against everything they stood for. But this wasn't surrender. This was acknowledgement. Zyra looked at Elias and gave a small, respectful nod. You win. Elias said nothing. He only returned the nod. Because deep down, they both knew. This battle was never just about them. It was about the future. The Eridani warriors, once roaring with excitement, now sat frozen. Their champion, Zyra, the unbreakable, had just stopped fighting. Her battle axe stood embedded in the ground, a clear message to all. She was not surrendering. She was acknowledging the truth. Across from her, Elias Voss remained still. His breathing was steady, though sweat dripped from his brow. His uniform was torn, his side bleeding from the small wound she had given him. Yet he stood firm, unyielding, and he had won. The Eridani shock. From the high stands, the Eridani Dominion leaders leaned forward in disbelief. Their champion, the strongest warrior of their people, had chosen to end the fight before victory or defeat was absolute. "This is unacceptable," one of the officials growled. "Sira would never do this," another whispered, shaken. But she had, and the warriors watching from the stands, they understood why. They had always believed strength was absolute. That power alone determined dominance. Yet, in this battle, power had failed. Elias had not won with brute force. He had won by adapting, learning, and countering everything thrown at him. And Sira had seen it happen before her very eyes. She had tried to change, tried to fight back differently, but Elias had changed faster. That meant one thing. If this had been a war instead of a duel, the humans would have won. A warrior's honor. Sira wiped the sweat from her brow and turned to face Elias. "I was wrong about your kind," she said, her voice steady. Elias studied her, waiting. "You are not weak," she admitted. "You are not prey, and you are not inferior." She exhaled slowly. "I see now. Humans are something else entirely." The crowd murmured, uneasy. Many Eridani warriors shifted in their seats, struggling to process her words. Elias tilted his head. "And what do you see?" Lyra looked at him for a long moment before answering. "A species that cannot be conquered." A heavy silence fell over the arena. The words hung in the air, undeniable. The Dominion had believed humanity would fall, that, like so many before them, they would break under the weight of Eridani's strength. But now, their strongest warrior was saying otherwise. And the Eridani warriors watching, they could not deny what they had witnessed. They had seen Elias change in real time. They had seen him learn and overcome an opponent far stronger than him. And if one human could do this, what could an entire species do? The leader's fury. Above the arena, the Eridani Dominion leaders whispered angrily among themselves. "This cannot be allowed," one of them said. "If the warriors lose faith in our superiority, they will question our rule," another hissed. The high commander of the Dominion, a towering figure with battle scars across his face, narrowed his eyes. Lyra had to be silenced. She was planting dangerous thoughts in the minds of their people, thoughts that could spread. The crowd was already uncertain. Doubt was a poison, and she was its source. He raised his hand. "End this spectacle," he ordered. Guards stepped forward. The moment of decision. Elias saw the movement immediately. Armed warriors, moving toward Sira. The fight was over, but the Dominion's pride was wounded. They wouldn't let Sira walk away after challenging their beliefs. Elias acted without thinking. He stepped in front of Tyra. The guards froze, unsure what to do. Tyra blinked in surprise. "What are you doing?" Elias didn't take his eyes off the approaching warriors, stopping them. Tyra frowned. "You think I can't handle them?" Elias allowed himself a small smile. "I think you shouldn't have to." Tyra glanced at the guards, then at the Dominion leaders above. She saw it now. They weren't angry that she had lost. They were afraid of what she had learned. Her fists clenched. They feared the truth. She turned to face the crowd. The warriors who had once cheered for her, they were watching, waiting. And for the first time in her life, Tyra didn't feel like a warrior of the Dominion. She felt like something else, something free. She took a deep breath and raised her voice. "The Dominion told us humans were weak." The crowd stiffened. "They told us humans were nothing." Her eyes swept across the thousands of Eridani warriors. "But today, you all saw the truth. They are not weak. They are not nothing. They are dangerous. Murmurs spread through the stands. Zyra turned to Elias. And if one human can do this, imagine what all of them could do. The Dominion leaders stood abruptly, rage in their eyes. This duel is over, one of them roared. But the warriors were no longer listening. They were thinking. And for the first time, they questioned everything. A shift in the stars. Tyra turned to Elias and smiled. You have done something far greater than winning a fight, human. Elias sighed. Why do I feel like that's going to be a problem? Tyra chuckled. Because it will be. She picked up her axe and slung it over her shoulder. But I think I'm done fighting for people who fear the truth. Elias raised an eyebrow. And what will you fight for now? Zyra's smile grew wider. Something worth fighting for. And with that, everything changed. The Eridani Dominion would never be the same again. The tension in the arena was thick, like a storm waiting to explode. The Dominion leaders stood in their high seats, their expressions filled with fury. Zyra had defied them. She had not only stopped fighting, but had spoken the truth in front of thousands of warriors. And now, those warriors were thinking. That was the real danger. Elias Voss, still standing beside Zyra, could feel the shift in the air. He had fought battles before, but this wasn't just a fight anymore. This was the start of something bigger. The Eridani Dominion had ruled with strength and fear, but now, their own greatest warrior had questioned their rule, and fear was no longer enough. The order to silence. The High Commander of the Dominion, a massive Eridani with deep scars across his face, slammed his fist on the metal railing of his throne. Enough of this, he growled. His voice echoed across the arena. Zyra has betrayed the Dominion. She has been corrupted by the human. Elias's jaw tightened. Here it comes. She will be executed immediately, the High Commander continued. And this human will be taken for study. Guards rushed forward, their energy weapons glowing. Zyra barely had time to react before Elias grabbed her arm and pulled her back. You planned this, didn't you? Tyra muttered, gripping her axe. Elias smirked. I don't like surprises. Zyra turned to face the advancing guards. Then you're going to hate this. She swung her axe in a wide arc, forcing the guards to step back. The crowd gasped. An Eridani warrior, attacking her own people. Elias took a step forward, his hands raised. Listen to me, he shouted. You all saw the truth today. You know what your leaders told you is a lie. The warriors watching hesitated. Even the guards, weapons ready, exchanged uncertain glances. They had all witnessed the fight. They had seen how Zyra learned, adapted, and changed. And they had seen Elias do the same. The Eridani had been taught that humans were weak. But today, they had seen that humans were something else entirely. Zyra pointed at the Dominion leaders. They fear the truth. That's why they want me dead. The High Commander snarled. She speaks poison. Kill them both. The hesitation in the guards disappeared. Orders were orders. They charged. The escape plan. Zyra and Elias moved in perfect sync. She swung her axe, cutting through a warrior's spear, while Elias ducked low, grabbing a fallen weapon and using it to block another attack. We need to move, Elias said, knocking a guard back. Zyra grinned. What, you don't want to take on an entire army? I'm confident, not suicidal. Elias scanned the arena. There was only one way out. The entrance the warriors had used to enter the battleground. Cover me, he said. Zyra nodded. Try to keep up, human. She charged forward, her axe moving like lightning. The warriors blocking the exit barely had time to react before she knocked them aside. Elias followed, moving fast. But then, more guards appeared, blocking their escape. Zyra cursed. There's too many. Elias's mind worked quickly. He looked up. The viewing platform where the Dominion leaders sat was directly above them. A new plan formed. We're not going through, he said. We're going up. Zyra blinked. You're insane. "Do you trust me?" Elias asked. Zyra glanced at the guards surrounding them. Then she sighed. "This is a terrible idea." Elias grinned. "I'll take that as a yes." He suddenly ran toward her. Zyra barely had time to react before Elias stepped on her knee and jumped, using her as a springboard. She immediately understood. With all her strength, she grabbed his foot and launched him higher. Elias flew through the air, twisting his body, and landed directly on the viewing platform. The Dominion leaders stumbled back in shock. Zyra smirked. "Not bad, human." She followed immediately, using the side of the wall to propel herself upward. Together, they now stood on the high platform, face to face with the rulers of the Dominion. "A final warning," the High Commander snarled. "You think you can change anything?" Zyra tightened her grip on her axe. "I already have." Elias stepped forward, his voice calm but strong. "This isn't the end," he said. "Your people saw what happened today. They won't forget. The warriors below were watching. Some still held weapons, some still followed orders. But many, many were uncertain. Doubt had been planted, and doubt grows." The High Commander's eyes burned with rage. "You think we'll let you escape?" Elias smirked. "You won't have a choice." He pressed a small device on his wrist. A loud explosion suddenly shook the sky. Above, a human stealth ship uncloaked, its engines roaring as it hovered over the arena. Ropes dropped down, and within seconds, Elias and Zyra grabbed hold. As the ship lifted them into the air, Zyra looked down at the warriors below. Some watched in shock, some still clutched their weapons, but many stared at her with something different. Not anger, not hate. Curiosity. The Dominion had ruled through strength, but today they had learned something new. Humanity was not weak, and worse for them, they were not afraid. As the ship carried them away, Elias turned to Zyra. "You just started a revolution," he said. Zyra smiled. "Good," because deep down she knew. This was just the beginning. The human stealth ship soared through the dark skies of the Eridani homeworld, its engines humming softly. Inside the ship, Elias Voss and Zyra stood in the main bay, catching their breath. The battle in the arena had ended, but both knew this was far from over. Zyra looked down at her hands, still gripping her battle axe. She had spent her entire life fighting for the Eridani Dominion, believing in their strength, in their rule. But now she had turned against them. She had chosen truth over obedience, and there was no going back. Aboard the human ship, Elias turned to the pilot, a sharp-eyed woman named Commander Raina Carter. "You got here just in time," Elias said. Raina smirked. "You always seem to find the worst possible situations, Voss." Zyra crossed her arms. "I assume you're in charge." Raina glanced at her. "I'm in charge of this ship, but when it comes to humanity's war against the Dominion." She shook her head. "No one's in charge of that. Not yet." Zyra frowned. "So you are at war." Raina's expression turned serious. "Not officially. But after today," she exhaled, "it's only a matter of time." Zyra looked back through the window, her homeworld shrinking behind them. She could feel it in her bones. The Dominion would not forget what happened today. They would come for her, and they would come for humanity. The Dominion's response. Back in the Eridani capital, the High Commander stood in the war chamber, surrounded by his officers. His fists were clenched, his rage barely contained. Zyra's betrayal had been witnessed by thousands. The human had escaped. And worst of all, the warriors had seen doubt. The Dominion had ruled for centuries because their soldiers had never questioned orders. But now, the High Commander had seen it in their eyes. Some of them wondered. Some of them doubted. And doubt was a poison. "We must act now," one of his advisors said, "before the infection spreads." The High Commander growled. "Launch the fleet." The room fell silent. One of the officers hesitated. "Sir, are we declaring war?" The High Commander's eyes burned with fury. "No," he said, "we are ending a war before it can begin." The choice ahead. On the human ship, Hydra paced back and forth. Elias watched her carefully. "Thinking of going back?" Zyra stopped. "I don't know." Elias leaned against the wall. "You know what's going to happen next, don't you?" Zyra met his gaze. "The Dominion will retaliate." Elias nodded. "They won't let this go. You exposed their lie. They can't afford to let that spread." Zyra sighed. Her people. Her home. Would she really stand against them? Could she? She had always believed that the Dominion was undefeatable, that their rule was absolute. But today, she had seen something different. She had seen humanity's will to fight back, and she had seen the warriors of the Dominion questioning what they had been told. Change had already begun. The question was, would she fight for it? The call to war. Reyna's voice came through the ship's speakers. "We're picking up a transmission." Elias and Sarah rushed to the control room. The screen flickered to life, showing the High Commander of the Eridani Dominion. His face was filled with rage. To all of Eridani space, his voice boomed. "We have been betrayed." Zyra's breath caught in her throat. This day, a traitor has turned her back on us. She has sided with the humans, who seek to corrupt our people, to weaken us. Sarah clenched her fists. The Dominion will not fall to weakness. The High Commander's eyes burned with fury. "As of now, we declare war on the human race." The transmission cut off. Silence filled the room. Reyna cursed under her breath. "Well, that's it. No turning back now." Elias looked at Zyra. "This is it. You have to choose." Zyra looked at the screen, her heart pounding. She knew what would happen next. The Dominion would strike first. They would crush humanity before it had a chance to resist. Unless someone stood in their way. Zyra exhaled slowly. And then, she made her choice. She turned to Elias, her expression hard as steel. "I fight with you." Elias smiled. "Then let's get to work." A new chapter begins. The human ship changed course, heading toward the nearest military outpost. Zyra stood on the deck, looking out into the vastness of space. Her people were coming. A war was about to begin. And for the first time in her life, she was fighting for something she truly believed in. The Eridani Dominion thought they were unbreakable. But they had never faced an enemy like humanity. And they had never faced a warrior like Zyra. This was just the beginning.